spiritual prayer dalam bahasa Malaysia on spiritual growth. Terangilah hati kami, kurniakanlah kami mata yang melihat dan telinga yang mendengar. Bukalah pintu pengertian sebenar dan biarlah cahaya keimanan bersinar dengan hilang gemilang. Terangilah hati kami, kurniakanlah kami mata yang melihat dan telinga yang mendengar. Bukalah pintu pengertian sebenar dan biarlah cahaya keimanan bersinar dengan hilang gemilang.
Loué soit ton nom, ô Seigneur mon Dieu. Les ténèbres enveloppent tous les pays et les forces du mal envahissent toutes les nations. À travers elles, je perçois cependant les splendeurs de ta sagesse et je discerne l'éclat de la lumière de ta sollicitude. Ceux qui sont séparés de toi comme par un voile imaginent qu'ils ont le pouvoir d'éteindre ta lumière, d'étouffer ton feu et d'apaiser les vents de ta grâce. Non, et ta puissance m'en est témoin. Si toutes les tribulations n'étaient les messagères de ta sagesse, et tous les malheurs les héros de ta sollicitude, personne n'aurait osé s'opposer à nous, même si les puissances de la terre et du ciel s'étaient liguées contre nous. Les rênes de tes ennemis seraient rompus si je devais révéler les merveilleux mystères de ta sagesse à mes yeux dévoilés. Glorifié sois-tu, ô mon Seigneur, par ton plus grand nom, je t'en supplie, réunis ceux qui t'aiment autour de la loi émanant de ta volonté, et envoie-leur ce qui confortera leur cœur. Tu as le pouvoir de faire ce que tu veux. Tu es en vérité le secours dans le péril, l'absolu.
Glorified art thou, O Lord my God. I give thee thanks, inasmuch as thou hast called me into being in thy days, and infused into me thy love and thy knowledge. I beseech thee by thy name, whereby the goodly pearls of thy wisdom and thine utterance were brought forth, out of the treasuries of the hearts of such of thy servants as are nigh unto thee, and through which the day star of thy name the compassionate hath shed its radiance upon all that are in thy heaven and on thy earth, to supply me by thy grace and bounty with thy wondrous and hidden bounties. These are the earliest days of my life, O my God, which thou hast linked with thine own days. Now that thou hast conferred upon me so great an honour, withhold not from me the things thou hast ordained for thy chosen ones. I am, O my God, but a tiny seed, which thou hast sown in the soil of thy love, and caused to spring forth by the hand of thy bounty. This seed craveth therefore, in its inmost being, for the waters of thy mercy and the living fountain of thy grace. Send down upon it, from the heaven of thy loving kindness, that which will enable it to flourish beneath thy shadow and within the borders of thy court. Thou art he who watereth the hearts of all that have recognized thee from thy plenteous stream, and the fountain of thy living waters. Praise be God, the Lord of the worlds.
Again, good evening, friends. very, very welcome. I would like to give a warm welcome to Will Escasoni from First Nations. Thank you very much for always joining us. Thank you, Will. Mr. Jero, thank you for being here. There are about 65 people. I'm sorry I cannot welcome you individually, but really, really, every single one of you add to an atmosphere of love and more than that, and understanding in these Thursday night evenings. I would like to introduce our speaker, but I would like to add this thing about Paul, which I think is very important before I introduce him to you. As soon as I sent Paul a message that I would like you to come and speak at our fireside, immediately I got an answer. Immediately it was a yes answer. Immediately he accepted to be a part of this. Usually this process will take between 3 to 9 months. Thank you so much for shortening this process for me, Paul. I appreciate it. My Canadian brother, thank you. Tonight we have a fantastic session. Abdu'l-Baha, the master of social action and public discourse. Paul Hanley is a recipient of the Rockefeller Foundation's Food System Vision Prize and the Association for Baha'i Studies Award for Distinguished Scholarship. He has published 7 books and 1,600 articles on the environment, sustainable development, agriculture, and other topics. He is the editor and co-author of Earthcare, Ecological Agriculture in Saskatchewan, 1980, as well as The Spirit of Agriculture, 2005. The author of 11, 2014, Man of the Trees, Richard St. Barbe Baker, the First Global Conservationist, 2018. And of course, Adasiyyih, Abdu'l-Baha's Model of Farming, 2024. Paul, thank you very much for accepting to be here with us. Go ahead, please. You're the co-host.
Thank you, Farouz. Lovely to be here and see all these faces, even a few that I recognize as friends and colleagues, our fellow Canadians. Although I'm here on the island of Molokai in the midmost heart of the ocean in Hawaii. And that's in the background, you can see out my window over the ocean. Not really. But in a few minutes, you could get to that scene. And so I'm here as a Baha'i pioneer and enjoying very much the experience and learning about a new culture and trying to fit in and be of some value and some use here, along with my wife, Hale Samimi. So, yeah, I'm very pleased to share some ideas about Abdu'l-Baha, our exemplar in the faith. And so I'll just go right into my slides. Just let me do the share screen. And presentation. So can we see that? Oops. Are we seeing the slideshow? I'm not.
Yes, very clear.
We can see Paul.
Yes.
Oh, okay. You can see it all right? All right.
Yes.
I was just trying to move this up here. Okay. So this is a beautiful picture of Abdu'l-Baha. And I thought of him, he's often called Abdu'l-Baha as the son of Baha'u'llah,
Baha'u'llah was the founder of the Baha'i faith. And Abdul means servant. He was a servant of Baha'u'llah, but Baha'u'llah called him the master. So I also thought it was interesting to think of Abdu'l-Baha as the master of social action and public discourse, and I'll tell you why. But first, I wanted to share with you just some concerns. I think probably a lot of us feel today that we're in a very strange world. And I was very affected by this picture. This picture is from Syria during the height of the war there. And I often thought this looks to me more like some kind of science fiction film, but it's not at all. And I think some of the conditions that are happening around the world today are really generating a lot of a sense of despair. And I've been working a bit lately, interviewing youth and looking at some surveys of youth around the world and what their feelings are about the world. And despair is one of the themes that comes out very strongly, with a majority of young people really fearful about their future. And a long time ago, 150 years or so ago, Baha'u'llah, he kind of recognized and foresaw this condition coming. And he talked about the winds of despair blowing from every direction, and the strife that divideth and afflicted the human race daily increasing. And he said that this is a result of a defective world order and the prevailing order in society that was coming together, emerging at the time when he was alive in the 19th century, was lamentably defective, he said. And he talked about the need to transform this defective order. And he beseeched God that he may graciously awaken the peoples of the earth, grant that the end of their conduct may be profitable unto them, and aid them to accomplish that which beseemeth their station. So Baha'u'llah said that humanity has a very high station, but we're really falling short of what beseemeth us. And so he had prayed for our transformation as a human race. And he said that the object of every revelation, of every religion, is to effect a transformation in the whole character of mankind, a transformation that shall manifest itself both outwardly and inwardly, and shall affect both its inner life and external conditions. So he talked about this need to transform our inner world and our outer world, and how those two worlds are very connected. So I wanted to just briefly, in the beginning, just talk about the need for transformation and the steps to transformation, and how the Baha'i faith has a systematic plan to bring about this transformation, or to contribute to the transformation that the world needs. And this plan involves three protagonists. So the understanding is that individuals, whole communities, and institutions need to transform and to become protagonists in their own development and their own transformation. And in this plan, there are really three areas of action. The first is building the capacity of these protagonists to contribute to the transformation of the world order, to really build capacity also to engage in conversations, deep conversations with people at the level of the individual, perhaps, with our friends, our families, our neighbors, but also to engage at a higher level in public discourse and to really transform public discourse, and also to engage in social action. So those things which will practically change the world. And this involves a set of core activities that help to build unity and capacity among people. And the beginning of this is really a loving relationship, but also building elevated and meaningful conversations with each other. So really just starting to talk to people about their reality, share our thoughts on reality and what we need to do differently. And also we're gaining capacity in this area of public discourse and really contributing to the important discussions that happen in society, in our organizations, our neighborhoods, our communities, in a way that elevates them and lifts them up. And also building capacity for effective social action, just beginning on a small scale, identifying through our discourse what needs to be done in our communities, and then starting on a small scale, doing some of these things, reflecting on what we're doing, and improving our social action activities. And this transformative process that's underway in Baha'i communities around the world, according to the Council, the Universal House of Justice, the Council for the whole of Baha'i world, this process has the potential to disable every instrument devised by humanity over the long period of its childhood for one group to oppress another. So a very potent process underway. Now, in this, our exemplar, the person we look to for really how to be and how to do things is Abdu'l-Baha. And as I said, I see him as a master of this, of capacity building, of public discourse and social action. Unparalleled in achievements in public discourse. He, for example, wrote 30,000 tablets. Now, a tablet is maybe a letter or a statement or a paper on different topics. And I was thinking about this 30,000 tablets because I'm a writer. As mentioned at the beginning, I've published something like 1,600 articles. But I realized if I had written an article every day or 5 days a week, if I was that prolific, it would take me 82 years to write 30,000 articles. So, and of course, the articles the tablets that Abdu'l-Baha wrote were tremendously profound, very, very deep analysis of what's going on in the world and what we need to do. So he really was a master of this area of public discourse, also verbal discourse in his international travels throughout Africa, Europe, and North America. Really, he shared really deep observations and concerns to the people of the world through these talks, which are all available to us. But he also had very many achievements in the area of social action. And mostly what I'm going to talk about today are his achievements in regenerative agriculture and rural development. So Abdu'l-Baha, he grew up in Iran. His father, Baha'u'llah, was a farmer, operated a large farm estate. And Abdu'l-Baha, even as a little child, was involved in agricultural activities. And his family was very wealthy, but when they became engaged in support of the cause of the Bab, the forerunner of Baha'u'llah and the co-founder of the Baha'i faith, all of their possessions were taken from them, and they went from luxury to poverty and experienced hunger. Abdu'l-Baha became the main support for his father, Baha'u'llah, and for the family, and became, as they traveled in their exiles around the Middle East, he became their master provisioner at the age of 19, looking after all the people, all their needs, all the food, and also all of their livestock, their animals. And he himself was a good cook and a gardener. Now, during the period of the 19th century, when Baha'u'llah was still alive, Abdu'l-Baha was actively promoting village reconstruction in Iran and in places as far away as Burma, with really remarkable results. And he especially loved villagers, people in rural areas, and farmers. And I was quite taken by this, learning about this remarkable tablet or letter that Abdu'l-Baha had written to the Baha'is of the village of Kishi in Iran. And that he mentioned in this tablet nearly 160 residents by name. So he had this intimate relationship with people, with Baha'u'llah's followers, and was very concerned about their development. And in the Baha'i faith, we talk about using the Baha'i teachings to release their society-building powers. And in the 1880s, Abdu'l-Baha was doing this. He was working with communities in Iran, especially at that time, and building important approaches to agriculture, different farms and ventures he was promoting and supporting. And a series of cooperatives, agribusinesses, and agricultural commodity trading companies were formed in several small towns and larger villages in Persia. I should also mention that Abdu'l-Baha was particularly concerned about one of the principles of the faith, of Baha'u'llah's faith, which is the equality of men and women. And he wasn't just content to talk about it, to promote it, but he wanted to make sure that it happened in effect. And so what he did was he promoted a literacy training for women throughout Iran, including the rural areas. And in Iran at the time, literacy levels were extremely low, but especially amongst women. But by around the turn of the 19th into the 20th century, it's said that the vast majority of Baha'i women in Iran were fully literate. So this was a big step forward for the emancipation of women. Now, I should point out that when Abdu'l-Baha was doing all of these things, he was actually still an exile and a prisoner. He was in prison in the prison city of Akka in Palestine, now in Israel. But at the time, he guided the community in Palestine, as well as he had in Iran, in establishing farming villages in the Galilee region and around Haifa and Akka area, including the model village of Adasiyyah, which I'll describe in more detail. Now, in the 1880s, the Baha'i community was largely imprisoned in the city of Akka, but the restrictions were relaxed, and they were able to establish some farms near Akka and Haifa. And so there were a number of small properties that were used to provide food for the Baha'i community and for others as well. And Abdu'l-Baha said that he had never dreamed of buying land bordering the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan River, but Baha'u'llah, the Blessed Perfection, commanded me to do so in consideration of their biblical sacredness and their historical association, which runs back into the oldest antiquity, thus connecting in a prophetic manner this new dispensation with Judaism and Christianity. So this was part of the impetus to start farming developments in the Jordan Valley on a larger scale than they had around the cities of Haifa and Akka. So a number of villages were started in the Jordan. These are a few of them. In this case, most of the villages were owned by relatives of Baha'u'llah, including two of his brothers. And most of the people that worked the farms were tenant farmers that originally had been in these villages, but now they were managed by the Baha'is. But Adasiyyah was a little different. Adasiyyah was a much larger village, and it was mainly farmed by the Baha'i community. It was purchased in 1901, quite a large area, over 2,000 acres, or 845 hectares. There were several efforts to farm this land which failed initially. And in 1907, Abdu'l-Baha requested that experienced Persian farmers come to the area to emigrate to operate the farm. So he contacted the Baha'is of Iran and asked them to find farmers, and they chose a group of Zoroastrian Baha'is from around Yazd to come to Akka and then on to Adasiyyah to start this farm. And this is where Adasiyyah was located. So at the top is the Sea of Galilee, and you can see the Jordan River on the left side of the screen, And the Yarmak River is the other river you can see. And Adasiyyah, this is a map from about the 1940s. So you can see most of those little figures in there represent either houses or buildings or orchards. And when Abdu'l-Baha brought the Persian farmers to Adasiyyah, he was very transparent. He said he welcomed them to the most inhospitable place on earth. So in the Jordan Valley at the time, agriculture had been neglected by the Ottoman Empire, and the land had fallen into disrepair. Mostly it was covered with thorny scrub bushes. It was extremely hot. There were venomous snakes, there were wild animals that were dangerous, and he made no bones about it. This is going to be a tough assignment to start a farm here. Now, farmers started from scratch. They had to build their own homes and begin cultivation. They went through severe tests. Initially, they weren't producing very much, but what they did produce was often robbed by people in the area. They weren't, they're outsiders, not necessarily accepted. So their crops would be robbed. Even sometimes parts of their buildings, the doors of their houses would be taken off and carried away. They went through many severe tests, illnesses. People were poisoned by snakes. There was a malarial swamp in the middle of the community, caused a lot of illness. But Abdu'l-Baha did things differently than what was the norm in the area at the time. Most of the farming arrangements were around with landlords, often absentee landlords, who took most of the produce of the farm and left the actual farmers with very little to live on. But Abdu'l-Baha, who owned the farm and was the landlord, set up very favorable tenancy arrangements so that the farmers themselves would be eventually quite comfortable. And he also encouraged diversification. Initially, they just started off by growing wheat and barley and so on. But soon Abdu'l-Baha said, no, diversify into more lucrative crops and to more perennial crops. So growing fruits and nuts and that kind of thing became the norm. And between 1914 and 1921, the master made 4 visits. And a lot of what he was doing there involved public relations and improving security. So he made relationships with the leaders of the community in the Jordan Valley, so that he could encourage them to increase the security and prevent robberies and so on, and just have a favorable attitude towards this Baha'i community, which was quite strange to the people there at the time. And over time, the conditions did improve. This is a picture of Abdu'l-Baha at Adasiyyah with some of the residents. And you can see that I believe this was taken at a Nowruz party, a Baha'i New Year party. And you can see some of the children. And also note that in addition to the Baha'is, there were many of the Arab farmers from the area who were also involved in the community as well. And I mentioned diversification. So this is an important element of this farming operation, is diversifying into many different field crops, vegetables, fruits, and also livestock to make the farm much more self-sufficient. And in addition to more advanced farming operations, Abdu'l-Baha encouraged spiritual development to go hand in hand with the material development, and encouraged the farm to establish children and youth programs. So this is a picture of some of the children who are involved in the children's classes and youth programs. And he also emphasized the devotional character of the community. So he said everything should start with prayer. And he said, when you're going to consult and make decisions about the community, come together first and pray together and build a strong devotional character within the community. And this will be the guarantee of your success. So the people did do that. Also, I talked before about the plan of the Baha'is in the world today, and this was already taking place at the time in the early part of the 20th century in terms of capacity building. So there was capacity building of adults achieving literacy, learning together, studying together to build their knowledge and their knowledge of farming systems and so on. So there's a lot of work being done in that area. And also institutional development. This is a picture of the first stage, the first story of the Baha'i Center, or Hazrat al-Quds, in Adasiyyah. And here is the completed two-story building that was the community center, the place where education could take place and the community could gather. And gradually life did improve, and the Baha'is there prospered and did very well. You can see in this picture how even the dress had changed, and for example, in previous pictures, most of the women were very covered, and their faces were covered, and they adopted a more modern approach to life, and increased the involvement of women in all the activities on the farm. Now, there's also a strong service component to the community, and Abdu'l-Baha had been very concerned about what he felt was a coming conflict, a coming war. And when he traveled in the West, one of his main tasks was to promote the cause of peace and try to prevent the onset of war. But war came anyway. The First World War happened, and starvation started to set in because a lot of the Middle East was blockaded. So people were beginning to starve. And perhaps that's why Abdu'l-Baha was one of the reasons why Abdu'l-Baha had started these farms, because he was able to get the people of Adasiyyah to collect all the grain that they had available, leaving some for their seed for the future years and for their own needs, but also to go around to all the farms in the area and collect grain. And they put together a camel caravan that went to Haifa and Akka, and this was used to save the population from starvation. Excuse me. This was the reason why Abdu'l-Baha was given a knighthood, or part of the reason he was given a knighthood by the British when the British took over the area after the end of the First World War. And Abdu'l-Baha was given this honor because he had used the farm operations and the grain from Adasiyyah and the neighboring farms to save the community. And he received the title of knight, but he never used it. Also, his sister, Bahia Khanum, who is Baha'u'llah's daughter, was very involved in the actual distribution of foods for the poor during the war years. So it's interesting. One of historian in Israel talked about the relationship between the kibbutz movement and Adasiyyah. And he shared this observation from some of the kibbutzim and how they talked about that Adasiyyah was a model village. And this is one of the things that they reported when they went to visit Adasiyyah. They said, at the entrance of the village is a beautiful boulevard of acacia trees. Most of the land is planted with gardens, an orchard of pomegranates of various varieties. We moved to a vineyard. Everything is arranged on cordons and beautifully processed. From there we reached the fruit trees, pineapples, apples of all varieties, pears, guava. We saw bananas. There are 2 varieties of golden oranges, grapefruits, mandarins, lemons. In conclusion, we saw here a perfect mixed farm. It is difficult to describe that in such a remote corner there is such wealth and beauty. And even the Iranian authorities, who are usually very hostile to Baha'is, had to acknowledge that Adasiyyah was a model village for Jordan. Most of them have the Baha'i religion, they said, talking about the Persians that were living in Jordan. Except for a few who are merchants and craftsmen, the rest are farmers who live in a village called Adasiyyah, located in the north of the country, and are engaged in farming. The mentioned village, from a modern agricultural point of view, is a model for other villages and farms of this country. So often, so I should say that, after the war years, Palestine was divided between Palestine and Jordan, and Adasiyyah was located now in Jordan. And often the royal family were visitors to Adasiyyah, including King Abdu'l-Bahá, who's shown in this picture. And he would come in his helicopter, and later years land, and without his guards would come into the Baha'i Center in Adasiyyah and visit with the friends there. And often they would invite people from the surrounding areas to come and meet him. Even the royal family would come sometimes and stay in Adasiyyah for a period of even a couple of weeks as a holiday. And they felt very safe and secure there and didn't even need their guards. Now, Adasiyyah, I think, is really an interesting example for our times. The village provided social and economic development for not only for the people that lived in the village, but for the surrounding area, because they contributed greatly to advancement of agriculture in the area. They were building capacity, including moral capacity, amongst the residents and the neighbors, and also providing ecological and climate services. So the farming systems that they were applying, which might today be called regenerative agriculture or agroecology, also improved the land. They weren't just producing and extracting from the land, but also improving the quality of the land as they were doing it. And this actually is one of the ways to resolve climate change, by taking organic carbon from the air and putting it into the soil. So in all, the landscape around Adasiyyah in the Jordan Valley was transformed. Adasiyyah played an important role as a model village. And now this part of the area, part of Jordan that was neglected for decades and longer by the Ottoman Empire, had become really a lush and productive area for both Israel and for Jordan. So interestingly, I came across some documents in 2018 documents from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. This one of them, Food and Agriculture to Achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, 20 interconnected actions to guide decision makers. So they identified in this document 5 principles, 10 elements, and 20 evidence-based, results-oriented actions. And the interesting thing was that all of these elements, this is being developed, being identified more than 100 years later, all elements to guide development of contemporary food and agricultural systems were being practiced in Adasiyyah 100 years previously. So these included fostering inclusive prosperity, giving the farmers themselves equity in the operation, sweat equity, empowering people and communities, building a sense of food sovereignty, and fostering regenerative systems, ecology, and enhancing the synergies between all of these things. So regenerative agriculture is a system that nurtures and restores soil health, protects climate and water resources and biodiversity, and enhances farm productivity and profitability. So, as I said before, it's not changing agriculture from an extractive practice to really a regenerative practice that improves the quality of the soil and of the environment. So this is a word that's being used now a lot, regenerative agriculture. And really, in many ways, Abdu'l-Baha and Adasiyyih were pioneers in this areas of development. Also, agroecology, which is a system of agriculture that kind of mimics ecological ecological practices. So agroecology emphasizes human and social values such as dignity, equity, inclusion, and justice, as well as ecological concepts. So again, these were being practiced in Adasiyyah, as well as these ideas of food security and food sovereignty, which were coined in 1996 by Via Campesina and later adopted by the World Bank and the United Nations. So again, the communities in Adasiyyah and the other farms operated by Baha'is were really quite advanced for their time. But in addition to these sort of material practices, another key element of Adasiyyah was its spiritual development, which I think was a key to making it a stronger community. It involved building the moral capacity of children and youth, adult study together, adult study circles, devotional gatherings, consultation guided by devotions. So when they consulted, they would pray first and be guided by those prayers, and spiritually centered institutions. In Adasiyyah, they elected one of the first local spiritual assemblies in the Baha'i world. Local assemblies are Baha'i councils. Since the Baha'i faith doesn't have clergy and monks and nuns and so on, we elect councils to guide community affairs. And so this is one of the first of these institutions in the world in Adasiyyah. And a strong connection to the covenant, the connection to Abdu'l-Baha, to the Baha'i World Center that helped to guide them. And I just thought I'd mention also, before we close, how Baha'i individuals are increasingly involved in social action and public discourse around the world. And in many cases, Baha'is were important innovators. For example, Baha'u'llah himself had encouraged Baha'is in northwestern Iran to grow potatoes. And this was a novel crop. It was difficult to get at the time to get people to do things that were innovative and novel. But Baha'u'llah encouraged the farmers to grow potatoes in this area. And during periods of crop failure of their standard grains, potatoes were used to sustain the population, and it became quite an industry in that whole area. Baha'is also introduced commercial tea production to Iran. They reintroduced bananas and other crops to Palestine and Jordan. It was Abdu'l-Baha who had encouraged the Baha'is to grow bananas for the first time, and now that's a major crop in the area. So Baha'is are taking action around the world to engage in elevate public discourse, but also in social action. And some of the Agriculture Working Group of the Association for Baha'i Studies has been promoting awareness of all the actions that are taking place by Baha'i communities. But this goes back a long time. It was mentioned before, I wrote a book about Richard St. Barbe Baker, the man of the trees, who was promoting agroecology and regenerative agriculture and regenerative forestry a long time ago. And this is a great picture of him in Benin in 1928, consulting with local people. And he was also very active in Britain, and where he's called one of the fathers of organic agriculture in the United Kingdom. I found some information about this gentleman, Liao Shongxian, who was a prominent agricultural researcher, scientist, involved in the rural development in China and rural education, and especially in the area of silk production, sericulture, and was one of the first Chinese Baha'is who also translated Baha'i literature. A very, very interesting figure and a real innovator in agriculture in China. And I mentioned also earlier that Abdu'l-Baha had encouraged village development as far away as Burma. This is a picture of the community of Dadana in Burma, which renamed itself Abdu'l-Baha's village, and became also a model community in that part of Burma. and is still active today. So I mentioned also some of the engagement around the world. I just wanted to show you a few of the people. These are farmers, perma-farmers in our community here in Molokai who are very well known. A couple of Baha'is who have engaged in permaculture on Molokai. And there's many projects around the world. The International Tree Foundation, which was founded by Richard St. Barbe Baker over 100 years ago, is continuing its work, planting trees throughout Africa and different parts of the United Kingdom. A rural university started by Baha'is in Colombia, encouraging agriculture and food production. Fundayak is a nonprofit NGO. For many years has been promoting rural development in Colombia. Activities in Nepal, supported by the local spiritual assembly to help people produce food locally. The Barley Institute for Rural Women in India trains women to become leaders of community development when they go back to their villages throughout the country. And also many small projects, such as the Unity Garden at the Baha'i Center in Charlotte, North Carolina, where people come together around really positive activities, growing food, and just enjoy each other's company and build bonds of friendship in the area. Important work being done by Baha'is in Fiji and other Pacific islands around coral restoration for fishing villages, and now whole of watershed projects to help maintain a clean ocean that will be very productive. As you probably have heard, coral reefs are being affected very much by bleaching caused by climate change, by increased heat. So this is really important work to try to preserve and restore coral reefs. Work in Uganda, establishing agricultural villages and building knowledge and social enterprises. Work in Quebec, creating new food systems that are equitable to farmers and ecological for the environment. And things like food hubs. Anyway, that's it. This has all been based mostly on my book, Adasiyyah. I have to put in a little plug, and you can get that from the Baha'i Publishing Trust or most of the online booksellers. And I'll stop there, and I will open up to any questions, comments. What do you think?
I let the hearts tell you how the people feel about your presentation, and then I use words, Paul. Welcome, Shu. Stay here for a Chinese prayer a little later. Thank you very much. I have to admit, Paul, that it has been some time that we did not have 80 people in our fireside, and you did it. Thank you.
It's great.
George, go ahead.
I was just wondering if Adasiyyah is still there, and who owns it or whatever.
Yeah, no, it's not, and I'll tell you why. I should say there is a community called Adasiyyah in that location, but it's no longer a Baha'i farming community. What happened was in the starting really in the 1940s when the State of Israel was formed, and there started to be friction between Israel and Jordan. And so it became kind of dangerous in the Adasiyyah area, and there'd be, fighting around the area. And so at that time, there was some people started to leave the farm, but it continued to operate until about 1970, at which point there were more conflicts. It became more and more dangerous. There was some shelling that hit Adasiyyah and killed someone. And it was just determined that it wasn't really feasible to maintain the farm on that ground. But there was another element to it, which was Jordan put into effect a new land tenure system. And basically they took the farms from the landowners and gave them back to the tenants. And there had been an arrangement that Abdu'l-Baha in his originally had made with the farmers there that they would never own that land. And the reason was that the land was supposed to become an endowment for the Baha'i shrines and centers in Haifa, Akka area. So they had that agreement that they would never own the land. So that was another reason why the Baha'i farmers all left that area. So yeah, it no longer exists. However, Abdu'l-Baha did say at one point that it would be reformed sometime in the future and that there would be a Baha'i house of worship there and so on. So who knows what the prospects are for the future.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you, Paul. Friends, any questions? Because I do have okay. Shalajan, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Paul. Always enjoy. I love the book Adasiyyah. It's one of my favorite books. I share it with my junior youth because I think agriculture should be introduced to young people, even in small little backyard garden, so that it becomes part of their nature or way of living. Because so many of our kids don't eat vegetables and fruit. And so I'm sort of trying to get our kids to get off fast food into vegetable and fruit. And we started actually at Nowruz with growing lentil, which the Persian culture do. And then they loved it because they were able to make it on a dish. And then they started asking their mom for a little patch in the backyard, and we have done some of that. I understand that some of the families of Baha'u'llah who were on some of these farms were asked to pioneer during the time of Shoghi Effendi, and so they left also. And I understand some of the properties were exchanged for some other properties in the Holy Land. Have you seen or heard anything about those?
Yes, one of the farms in particular was called at Naguib. I think that's how you pronounce it. It became kind of untenable too due to the political situation there. But the government of Israel traded that land for land around the shrine of Baha'u'llah. But it was, and I think the area around the shrine went from, oh man, something like, it increased by something like 10 times the amount with that exchange. So, and that was one of the intentions of having these properties in the Jordan Valley, in the Galilee area, was to be endowments for the Baha'i World Center. So that was one case where that worked, was the exchange of land for Naguib.
My second question is, what got you involved in this whole project? Did you kind of get into that study, or was this something that you got into later?
You mean the Adasiyyah project?
No, farming. And
yeah, I'm not a farmer.
I know,
and I don't know, as a teenager, I got into it. There was kind of a back to the land movement, you know. We grew our hair long and big beards and went out onto the land and tried to do some kind of gardening or farming. And I was really inspired by some of my neighbors. I lived in a small town in Saskatchewan, and they had this elderly couple that lived near us had this incredible garden. And I sort of realized, oh, people could do this, you know, you could produce a lot of your own food, and why not? And it's a very enjoyable pastime. So I got into that, and ever since I became engaged in supporting the organic farming movement in Saskatchewan and wrote some books about that. And I don't know, it just always seemed to be very important. At kind of around the same time I became a Baha'i, and I read some of Baha'u'llah's statements about agriculture being really central to the New World Orders that he's proposing. And so, it made sense also from a perspective of religion to become involved in agriculture. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Any more questions? Welcoming Mr. Perimal, welcoming Carol, welcoming many friends who just joined us. Thank you very much. I have two big questions, but as a sign of courtesy, I'll sit back and see if there are any other questions. Let me ask.
I've got a question. Can I ask myself? No. Can I ask Salah, you were talking about how you used the book Adasiyyah with your junior youth. Like, how did that go over? Like, how did you use it? And what was their reaction? I'd be really curious to know.
May I share?
Yes.
Well, what happens that there are some stories have been written about Abdu'l-Baha. We have 7 stories for children. And one of these stories about Abdu'l-Baha receiving a knighthood and about Adasiyyih, one of the reasons being Adasiyyah. Then, of course, being a Persian, I have to go back that when I moved to North America and raised kids, when my son was 5 years old, I heard him in the backyard saying that he was 50% English Canadian because his father was English Canadian. He was 49% French Canadian because he was born in Quebec, and he was 1% Persian. And I decided that I needed to introduce Persian culture into our household. So I started doing Nowruz celebrations with growing lentil and wheat, and started introducing the ancient history into the children's life. And so as a result, I got myself interested in growing lentil and wheat. And then, of course, when I was growing it, we would have gathering with our junior youth and children's classes. And so they kind of started saying, oh, wow, what do you do with this? I said, I eat them. So they said, you eat them? I said, yes. And then when your book came out, I introduced, because they had some knowledge of Abdu'l-Baha and some knowledge of Adasiyyah and the book, and they got really excited. They said, oh my God, this is not something that you do, but people all over the world are involved in it. Because to the kids, food is metro and, the shop that you go and pick up a package of something. So for them, growing is something new. So actually, they asked me if you were a farmer, and I said no. They said, how come someone who's not a farmer has got involved in this book? So this is why I asked the question.
Oh, it's great to hear that the youth are interested in that. Last night in Molokai, we had a Baha'i community sponsors public talks at our library. And we had 4 young people, high school students, who are involved in some way in farming or the culinary arts, speak to us and share their ideas about, how Molokai could become more self-sufficient in food and so on. It was really nice gathering.
Thank you, Terry. Go ahead, please. By the way, welcome, Terry. Go ahead. Terry, unmute yourself.
Terry, you're muted still. There you go.
Perfect.
Okay. Sorry about that. Thank you so much, Paul. It's so nice to meet you. I've read both the books that you mentioned, Adasiyyah and the Men of the Trees. It's just wonderful. I've gotten a lot out of them. And I guess I was wondering, you had mentioned about the development of the kibbutz in Israel. And could you talk a little bit more about that? Is there a connection between Adasiyyah and the development of kibbutz? I mean, I guess how strong a correlation is there?
The reason I said that there was any was because of there's a historian named Shea Rosin, Dr. Shea Rosin, and he has written quite a bit about, he's not a Baha'i, but he's written quite a bit about the Baha'is' role in Palestine and Israel, especially farming operations. And he's made some presentations to Baha'i groups. And he's the one who brought this up. So I shared that one quote about the one kibbutz community that went to Adasiyyah and really enjoyed being there. But he thought there was perhaps more to it than that some of the principles of the Baha'i faith had inspired certain aspects of kibbutz life, one of them being around the equality of men and women. So I don't know if that's just, I didn't make it up, but I don't know I don't know whether that's just sort of speculative on his part or if there's a really strong connection or not. But definitely kibbutz members went to Adasiyyah and learned quite a bit about the farming aspect.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Someone asked about
Paul, there's a question for you in the chat and said, what was the author's name? Rosen?
Shea Rosin or Rosen. I've seen it spelled transliterated different ways. There's a really good talk that he gave to Baha'is in the UK that's available on YouTube. So if you put in Shea Rosin Baha'i Farms or something like that, I'm pretty sure you'd find it. Yeah, very, very interesting.
Thank you very much. Let me ask you my question, please, friends. You feel free to ask any questions. Just raise your hand. Paul, coming from Iran, I never had the knowledge that the Baha'is from Zoroastrian backgrounds were good farmers. Is this the reason why Abdu'l-Baha asked them to come?
That's my understanding. I guess there were a number of Zoroastrian villages around Yazd. And they came, I think in the book it mentions the name of the villages they mostly came from. But Abdu'l-Baha had asked the Spiritual Assembly of Tehran, which I guess was sort of the equivalent of the National Assembly at that time, before they had a National Assembly, if they could identify some farmers to come. And they identified those farmers. So they were experienced people. As I mentioned, there were a couple of attempts to start the farming operation at Adasiyyah after 1901 when it was purchased that failed. And I think Abdu'l-Baha realized, okay, we need more experienced farmers, but we need a community. It was quite a big farm. It was over 2,000 acres. So we need to do this like a village kind of farm. And so that's when he brought in these people. And I think, at one time there was maybe about 200 or so Baha'is living on the farm, 250. Plus, there were also a number of the Arab people who lived in the area also helped work on the farm. And also, there was a lot of labor came from people who would come to the farm at certain parts of the season to pick fruit and so on. So they actually contributed quite a bit to the regional economy as well.
Mm-hmm. And also, I wanted to just make this comment that in The Secret of Divine Civilizations, Abdu'l-Baha speaks about the role of a farmer and how farming and a farmer, this is one of the most important elements of progress.
Yes. Yeah. And, one of the things I found, I found very interesting, I mentioned before the Bab, who was one of the co-founders of the Baha'i faith. In his writings, he said that farmer is one of the names of God. And he said kings is one of the names of God. And he said because farmer and king are both names of God, farmers should be treated like kings. which I thought was, oh, that's really interesting. So there's a really, really strong writings that indicate that farmers is a very important occupation. In fact, Abdu'l-Bahá said it was the most important occupation. And there was a tremendous love from the central figures of the faith for rural people and farmers, which, you know, I included quite a few stories in the book about that deep connection that they had.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Friends, the floor is open. Also, later on, Paul, if you could read the chat, Isabel wrote an extensive message. I have another question for you. Paul, Abdu'l-Bahá did almost exactly what he did in Iran, meaning creating communities, creating schools for both boys and girls. So it was like a microcosm that happened in Adasiyyah. Do you see that?
Yes, I think so. And in the book, I share the story of a number of villages in Iran that developed kind of along the same lines. I mean, they were already existing villages, but the people were you know, encouraged into further development of farming, like more cooperative development and so on. So those were already existing villages. Interestingly, whenever these villages would prosper, they would become the center of an attack by the authorities. And so it was kind of dangerous to succeed in these villages. And even today, some of the villages in Iran that are Baha'i villages are being attacked. And another unusual thing is that I mentioned the village in Burma that became Abdu'l-Bahá's village, but it was also attacked by the authorities because they were using kind of unconventional ideas and so on. And they were attacked by the army, but they survived that attack and are flourishing today. When I went on pilgrimage a number of years ago, there was a whole contingent of Baha'is from Burma, from Abdu'l-Bahá's village. And we couldn't speak the same language, but they'd introduce themselves and say their name, and they say, I'm from Abdu'l-Bahá's village. It was wonderful to be there with them.
And also, Paul, I just wanted to say that the whole idea of Abdu'l-Bahá receiving the title of Sir created some havoc between people who wanted to find fault with the Baha'i faith.
Yeah. Yeah, trying to find links between them and the British government, and you know, because there was controversy with the British and Iranians, and then later with Israel and so on. Yeah. There's Winnie Merritt put in the link to Shay Rosen's talk, The Rise and Fall of Baha'i Settlements in the Jordan Valley. And so you can click on that. And also there's a question from Isabel about the microclimates created in Adasiyyah. And as I mentioned, yeah, Abdu'l-Bahá really encouraged diversification. And a lot of the diversification was into tree crops. So the tree crops were really important in creating a microclimate. It's extremely hot conditions there. And most of the land was covered by thorny scrub brush. So they had to clear that out and kind of create irrigation systems and you know, quite extensive tree coverage, which would create the microclimates that improve the weather. And Abdu'l-Bahá said when the farmers came, he said, this is an incredibly hot and difficult place, but he said, I promise you that God will change the weather for you. And it actually happened. Now, God helps those who help themselves, you know. So a lot of it was the work that the people put into creating this better microclimate. And for example, they one of the things they did, I had said that there was a malarial swamp in the middle of the village, and they planted a whole bunch of trees around this swamp that sucked up all the water and cleared the swamp, so that they didn't, after a while, they weren't affected by malarial mosquitoes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Welcome, Olga. Thank you for coming. Let me ask you another question, Paul. There are so many thanks for you in the chat. How long did it take for Abdu'l-Baha and the friends from Iran to create what they envisioned?
Well, they came there in around 1907. They started to come, and by the end of by about 1917 or so, that's when they started to deliver the grain, sufficient grain to Haifa Ak area that they prevented mass starvation. So in that period of time, they had really accomplished quite a bit. And then it would take longer before they developed this very diversified farm. But by the time Abdu'l-Baha passed, they had developed multiple committees and so on that worked on different aspects of the farming operation and under the advice of Abdu'l-Baha. But by the time he passed, they developed enough institutional capacity that they could operate without his advice. They elected their local spiritual assembly and all the committees that they needed to operate different aspects of the farm. So yeah, I'd say after about 10 years, they were fairly well on their way to prosperity and productivity.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Dearest Olga, please go ahead.
Thank you. I had a question about agriculture being central to the New World Order. I'm thinking, how come it will be central if, as well can see, technology is becoming increasingly important in the world? So I'm thinking, why agriculture? And my question is for everybody. If you have any ideas to share, would be great.
It's interesting that it's almost at the time of the Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha's time, almost the whole world was rural. There was very little urbanization at the time. And somewhere in I think the 1990s, it switched so that the majority were urban. But the actual number of farmers and rural people is way higher now than it was at the time of Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha, because the population is so much bigger. And still today, something like almost a third of humanity are farmers, farm families, farm workers, and people involved in food systems. So it's still the largest occupation in the world. And it's also the one that's absolutely essential. I mean, we can't eat computer chips, so we have to continue to make food, and also so that's the essential thing. But also, there's more understanding now of the importance of agriculture in terms of protecting the environment and dealing with climate change. And one of the most effective ways of addressing climate change is through improving agriculture, especially the idea of increasing soil organic carbon. So you're taking carbon out of the atmosphere and putting it into the soil. It's probably the least costly way of dealing with climate change. And at the same time, it would help improve the conditions of the rural poor, which are the poorest of the poor in the world. So I still see it as really the central activity of humanity, even though it doesn't have the kind of luster of high technology today. Other ideas about that?
Olga, are you fine?
Well, I'm still thinking.
Oh, okay, good. Thinking in Russia is wonderful. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
You know, Paul, people come from so many different places and they join us and they contribute to these sessions. Thank you very much for you to come, Paul. Friends, any more questions? Let me ask you a question, Paul, before anybody asks. Paul, what is it that you got from this extensive research, both as far as the economy of it and the agriculture part of it, as well as the spiritual aspect of it?
I don't know. I guess I was very moved by how Abdu'l-Baha and and also Baha'u'llah himself weren't just talking about about ideals or principles. They were also putting them into practice in their own lives and in the life of the Baha'i community. So I thought that was very, very important to know that that this isn't just a religion of ideas, and sort of noble principles, but it's also connected to going out there and making change in the world. And I think in the Baha'i community today, this is the main goal, is to release the society building powers of the faith. So put them into practice. Just being espousing religion doesn't necessarily mean that much unless you're doing something to bring about a new society, a transformed society. So I guess that's knowing that the central figures of our faith were actually out there, doing this work in their lifetime, in addition to everything else they had to do of building a world faith. They were also out, and even Abdu'l-Baha was out in the gardens himself, carrying soil in his cloak and building up the gardens and pumping water. He was an extraordinary figure on all fronts.
Thank you. If you go to Adasiyyah right now, what do you see, Paul? And have you been there recently?
I haven't. My son used to live in Jordan at one time. He was studying Arabic, and we drove by Adasiyyah, and the Baha'i friends who were with us said, you can't go in. It's sort of a controversial thing because of its location, because it's literally right on the border of Israel and Jordan. However, recently, somebody who was associated with Baha'i Publishing Trust was in Jordan, and they were taken to Adasiyyah. They sent me back videos and pictures from Adasiyyah, which is now, I think the Baha'i Center there was turned into a guest house. And, it seems a bit sort of ramshackle and overgrown a bit. So, yeah, someday maybe it'll become a model farmer community again. Who knows?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Please go ahead, Kay. Did you have a question?
Not really a question, just an appreciation. I had read this story about Adasiyyah, and we were pioneers. We were living in a village in Southeast Alaska for 12 years, and took an old cannery building and remodeled it into a Baha'i center. And the doors were open to everybody all that time. And over a period of time, we had to leave. Other people came, they left, and right now the building was given back to the community. It's owned by one of the tribal families and doesn't serve in any way the way that it was meant to serve. And so when I saw the pictures of the Baha'i Center in Adasiyyah and realized that things come and they go, and sometimes the feeling that we have of attachment to any degree of success, whether it's a Baha'i effort or any other effort, it's like the story isn't finished yet. And it's possible, yes, it sounds like there may even be a future Baha'i center in Adasiyyah, a house of worship. All I'm saying is not to be too attached to the things that we consider a successful program.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, thanks for that observation.
Thank you, Kay. Thank you so much. Paul, Jennifer wrote for you very important topic and wonderful presentation with much gratitude, and may we encourage our young folks to become farmers. Such a gift. There are very many nice and warm messages for you. Thank you messages for you. I just wanted to say that usually the last half hour of our sessions are being used for devotionals, and I don't know who would like to stay with us, but Paul, let me thank you so very, very much for being here tonight, also for really making this research alive, because when we went to children classes, we always read back in Iran about Adasiyyah, but I never thought it would become like this, that sometime in the future somebody will come and give a fireside about it and write about it and examine it as such. Thank you so very much, Paul. Appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome, Paul. Thank you. Friends?
Furujan, thank you very much that you have all this nice session. And thank you, Paul. I really enjoyed it. We heard about it, but you added more information that I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so very much. Please, Mahvash Ketamian Kivari. Can I ask something, Fruz? I see a name there, Isabel Mosler, but I don't see her face. I think we used to know each other in Ontario. We used to live in Deep River. And Isabel, you were around North Bay or something like that.
Why don't you write a note to Isabel? Isabel actually wrote something beautiful in the chat.
I did, but I can't see her note. As soon as how do I see her note?
Probably she has left. There are a few people, at least 20 people have left. So with
no, she's still there. Oh, okay. But I cannot see her writing anymore.
No,
right.
In the
because
chat.
I'm in the hospital. I'm in the hospital, so.
Okay.
But yes, you came to my farm in Levine, Ontario.
There you
but
go.
I had a farm for, yeah. Okay.
Okay.
That was many years ago. I love you.
Love you too. Nice to hear your voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you for responding. Appreciate it. Really, really thank you. We're going to move to our devotional part.